It is not uncommon to have early finishing trades have retainage released industry-wide, not so much on public work in New York State. There's a general view that by public owners that they can't release that. Now, we can debate the value of that, and depending on what the trade is. There may be some that it makes sense for. The concrete, for example, the example we use on the substantial completion piece for a portion of the work is if you've got an addition and a renovation of a school. And the addition is done, you declare substantial completion, C of O for that addition, and you move the students into that building, so then you start the renovation. At that point in time, the retainage should be released on all those contractors, steel, concrete, for example, that would have little or nothing to do with the renovation work. Release the retainage for that portion of the work. I will also note that, we mentioned the idea of team building, but one of the things that's happening today is a discussion about lean, which is how you get the fat out of the industry. And it's estimated that there's roughly 56% waste on the average construction project throughout the country. And how do you reduce that waste? Well, some of it is related to payment and related to money flow. It's also related to batch size. So one of the things that we're seeing, in fact, I discussed this with an owner the other day on a project, a state project, and the idea of turning over floors of a building. And if you can reduce the batch size to turn over floor by floor by floor, you can start getting that retainage released and removed, and maybe the concrete or the tile contractor doesn't have all his retainage released, but certainly retainage related to that floor can be released. And so there are a lot of mechanisms that can be used and should be used. Some of them are contractual. Some of them that is tough to legislate, except to the extent of allowing it and making it clear to the public owner that this is allowable, acceptable, and in fact expected of you to be creative in the ways to release retainage on contractors and their trade partners as they go along in the project. And so certainly that's something that we advocate.
I appreciate that, and I agree with you. There are ways of being able to do that in a way that is constructive and doesn't lead to, as you described it, the bane of the industry, which is essentially having all of that retainage and, coincidentally, many of the change orders stacked up at the very end of the project. I heard from a contractor recently, to the point I think that we're both making here, that they did a school, brand new school. School opened in September of 2015. Kids are inside of the school right now and attending class, and retainage is still being held. And the contractors have been told that the retainage will not be, and they should have no expectation that the retainage will be released until January of 2017. And there's no answer for that. And by the way, again, to the point you made about maintenance items, they're still getting punch list items for the project now, even though it's occupied and there are people running around and using it. So there has to be a way of being able to bring this to a head. I appreciate the AGC support for these two referenced bills. I happen to agree that both would be welcome additions, and we should try and get them both passed. Both Senator Ranzenhofer's and Assemblyman Cusick's bills are helpful, but I would ask that the AGC equally consider some proposed bills that are out there having to do with prompt pay and placing public policy in place that allows for mechanisms for prompt pay. Now, the state has already passed prompt pay legislation. We have laws on the books that call for prompt pay in the private sector and public sector. And if they're not being used, I don't think it's because people are being intimidated, because frankly, it's hard to intimidate people who are about to go out of business if they're looking for a lifeline, that is, to get paid for things that they have already provided. What I would suggest is let's work together. And certainly if the AGC has any suggestions on how we can streamline that process, improve the process, but most importantly, provide for prompt pay, because I think as a public policy issue, it's a very important one here in New York State. Senator Savino.
Thank you. I certainly could not agree more. I just have a couple of technical questions, because obviously the change orders are one of the big problems, but change orders are certainly not new in this industry. So one would assume that it should almost be expected that there will be change orders on a large project. So why does it appear to be so difficult to get approval for it? To get these things signed off on, particularly since the work is going to be done anyway. I mean, it's almost as if you know it's going to happen, and all these years no one's figured out how we can expedite the approval process because the work is getting done anyway.
Part of it is a matter of trust. One of the things I often do say to young architects, young public officials, and private owners for that matter, is that one of the first things you ought to do is find a contractor that's bidding a job, a general contractor, and sit in and observe their war room on bid day and understand what goes into it. It is not a pretty process, and numbers are coming in late, and it's a process that has its flaws. We can talk about alternative project delivery and how New York State is generally, not generally, is one of the most backward states in the nation relative to procurement on the public sector. But when we look at a hard bid, it's a difficult process. I was doing a talk to a bunch of young architects at a large architectural firm in New York City. And some brave young soul raises his hand and says, well, that's not what we were taught in college. And then there are a lot of, yeah, we were taught something different. Well, what were you taught? Well, we were taught that the general contractor and the trade contractors, they have their prices set about 2 weeks before bid opening, and in that final 2 weeks, all they're doing is pouring through the documents to find out where the change orders are that they can take advantage of. This is what they're being taught in college. And so there's a basic trust factor relative to change orders that we have to get over, and I believe the industry is finally beginning to overcome that. But as I said in the testimony, contrary to popular myth, we don't like change orders. We would rather go through a project without them. But others seem to think that that's not the case. And so once you get into that process, if there's a basic trust factor that the contractor is going to try and take advantage of you, the knee-jerk reaction is to figure out ways to say no. Not ways to come to an agreement, but how do I say no? And how can I keep on putting roadblocks in the way? Because I want that process to be painful. If I think the contractor is taking advantage, I want that process to be painful. And that's a wrong attitude. And that's an attitude, as I said, is beginning to change as we do more and more team building, as we look at lean processes and ideals. We're starting to see that change, but it will take some time.
Are most of the change orders, are they design flaws, or are they or is it simply because they didn't realize how much, or is it that the architect believes that the contractor underbid that particular section of the job, that they didn't adequately understand how much it would cost for that, or is it a combination of things?
The perception by designers oftentimes is the contractor underbid that portion of the work, and they're trying to make it up. But the reality is that change orders come in three basic categories. A design error, you missed something. The designers are not perfect, and they're given a short time frame to put designs together. And they make mistakes. And we know on projects, if it's a renovation job, there's going to be a certain percentage that we know is going to be change orders, and on new projects, there's going to be a certain percentage. I can't remember what those percentages are, but somewhere in the 2 to 6% range. We know that's going to happen. And so contractors on other types of procurements will put contingencies in those. In a CM at risk approach, there will be contingencies. But so it's that. It's owner program changes. As they're going through, they're seeing the job come together, and they'll make a change. And it could be a change in new technology, it can be any number of things. And the final is unforeseen conditions. If you've got a renovation, this goes back to why the changes may be higher in renovations, things behind the wall. I haven't done all the investigations necessary because it's cheaper to pay the change order later on, if they think about it, than to engage in all the investigations going forward. Or there might be something under the ground, ground contamination, groundwater, rock, whatever it may be.
But in your experience, have you ever seen a job that didn't have change orders on it?
Never.
Never. So one would think we could figure out a way to expedite the approval process so we can get over this hump sooner rather than later. Hopefully we'll get some solutions today or some suggestions as to how we can get past this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, in conversations, and this is anecdotal, it's anecdotal, but when contractors are paid on time, when general contractors are paid on time from the owners, and in turn pay their subs on time, anecdotally, I've heard remarkable stories about how projects are come in on time, on budget, because everyone appears to be working together, even when it comes to resolving change orders. And maybe there is a level of distrust there. But I guess the goal here is this. If we are in a system right now where if a subcontractor gets a change order, that is a significant change order, I would think that for the most part, they wouldn't want to do it. If it's a departure from their scope of work, not their scope of work, but from the contract that they signed and agreed to, signing a change order these days without having the assurances that they otherwise have under their contract, because the change order, by virtue of the change order, exists outside of the contract. There are very few subcontractors out there who would want to take on that risk and exposure without having some assurances, and yet they're required to move forward. And so dealing with this issue, to the Senator's point, I think is so critically important in terms of public construction in general, private construction in general, and the ability to get projects done on time and on budget, and hopefully keep people working. So I thank you very much for being with us today and for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Peter Rosigno, who's Government Affairs Associate for the New York Electrical Contractors Association. Mr. Rosigno, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Senator Martins and Senator Savino. On behalf of the New York Electrical Contractors Association, I would like to thank you for having me here today. I am Peter Rosigno, the Government Affairs Associate for the New York Electrical Contractors Association. Since 1892, New York Electrical Contractors have built New York City's most treasured landmark buildings and signature construction projects. Our contractors presently employ more than 20,000 men and women that have clocked in over 25 million work hours in 2015. Our workforce is comprised of skilled electricians, apprentices, project managers, clerical staff, engineers, and expediters, all delivering the most cutting-edge, diverse, and complex electrical installations the world has seen. You can find our contractors in every sector of work, from high-rise construction and infrastructure to public schools and local retail stores. As contractors, we ensure our workforce has good jobs with solid wages and excellent benefits that enable our employees to provide for their families. As the leading trade association of electrical contractors in New York City, New York Electrical Contractors Association has helped build New York, promotes the highest standards of worker safety in the industry, serves our communities in times of crisis, and provides opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. We are proud of what we do, but frankly, it's hard doing it in New York, and payment issues are but one of many challenges NECA members face every day. The construction industry is booming in New York. Contractors are bidding jobs and workers are hard at work. In many ways, the construction industry is proving to be one of the most vital parts of New York State's economy. However, prompt payment for work performed continues to be a major problem, with contractors and subcontractors often waiting months to get paid on completed projects. Oftentimes, this practice leads to cash flow and liquidity problems. Contractors and subcontractors are major employers in New York, and their ability to complete a project and move on to another where they can hire more workers all depends on their ability to get paid promptly. I have two examples today. The first one is more of a public issue, whereas the second one is or two examples, one of which is a public, the other one is a private, that illustrates this problem. There's an electrical contractor in New York City who is currently being stonewalled by the New York City Comptroller's office. on a change order requested he submitted for payment. As you know, a change order is work that is added to or deleted from the original scope of work of a contract, which alters the original contract amount and completion date. This change order altered the project and ended up costing more than the original proposal. This change order was approved, the work was completed to the owner's satisfaction, but now the subcontractor is sitting in court suing for the money he is owed. This is wrong, it needs to be corrected, and contractors should have to legitimately get paid. Unfortunately, this example is typical and all too often the problem when dealing with public agencies in New York. It becomes a vicious cycle of bid the job, win the bid, perform the work, and then wait for your paycheck. The second example is I speak to a contractor doing private work all the time who tells me they spend more time talking with their lawyers about ways to get paid than anything else. I have a subcontractor who primarily works on hotels. If he were to work directly for the hotel, he would get paid within 30 days. If he were to work for a general contractor, he might get paid in 90 days, but there would be no obligation to pay on time, save for the state prompt pay law, which we all know is almost impossible to enforce. So a lot of times these general contractors are financing their next project on the payment they owe subcontractors. There is no accountability for the subcontractor, and the general contractor certainly won't go to bat for the sub. To make matters worse, there is no procedure to get approval on an invoice. Most of the time, a general contractor will submit an invoice to the owner or the representative. The representative then scrutinizes and delays the approval of the invoice, even after the work has been done. The subcontractor, who is working for the general as the middleman between him and the owner, gets squeezed. My subcontractors often tell me that they should not do work without an approved change order from the general contractor. This would allow them to get paid on the work if there is ever a disagreement between the owner, the general contractor, and the subcontractor. While these are just two examples, there are many more like it. If you were to survey a room of subcontractors, I think you would find that aside from not being paid on both public and private projects, the transparency around they aren't being paid is just as unsettling. Where is the money being held up? Has the general contractor been paid yet? Is there more money being held up in the comptroller's office or the private owner's office? Thankfully, this committee recognizes that prompt pay reform is vital to keeping contractors in business. Senator Martins has introduced several bills that will help facilitate prompt payment to subcontractors, often making the difference between life or death for the subcontractor working on the job. S7613 would require contractors to submit timely requisitions for payments of invoices for all performed and materials provided on public construction projects by subcontractors or material men. This bill would require contractors to submit timely requisitions for payment of invoices for all work performed and materials provided on public contracts by subcontractors. There is S7615, which would substantially strengthen existing state law and require prompt payment to subcontractors on private construction projects. While we are still reviewing each of these bills and may have specific comments on bill language, we know for sure right now that these bills acknowledge and address the sad reality that contractors and subcontractors in New York must often wait months, sometimes even years, to get fully paid. And again, we thank Senator Martins for introducing them. Let them represent the beginning of a constructive dialogue on the issue of prompt payment to contractors and subcontractors in New York. In addition to prompt pay reform, there is beneficial legislation pending in the Senate as it pertains to delayed damages, retainage reform, and public works contracts reform, all issues facing subs. I'm happy to report that a few of these bills have gained traction in the legislature this year and with the other respective industries represented here today. Delayed damages refers to the common sense notion that if a contractor or subcontractor is working on a construction project and there is a delay in the performance of that job, that it is not the fault of the contractor or the subcontractor. The subcontractor, subcontractor, or material man may seek recovery for unanticipated costs associated with the delay. Incredibly, many state and local public works contracts in New York actually contain provisions that explicitly prevent a contractor or subcontractor from recovering damages under certain circumstances. S6582, originally introduced by the late Senator Libous, would require that all public entities in the state include a clause authorizing contractors to recover delays for damages under appropriate circumstances. We thank Senator Libous for helping us champion these issues in the Senate and consistently passing them in the Senate chamber. Senator Hannan has taken the bill, and we look forward to working with him on it. We hope that the Assembly will also move. We truly appreciate the strong support of each of you that each of you has shown on the issue of delayed damages over the years, and we must not give up on the fight. Regarding retainage, which NECA considers to be an adequate and much abused practice, antiquated and much abused practice by which a project owner simply holds on to or retains a portion of the final funds due to the contractor. I'd like to mention two bills, while recognizing there are more on the docket that attempts to reform this troublesome practice that often places an incredible strain on a contractor or subcontractor's cash flow. First, S37, introduced by Senator DeFrancisco, which simply require that any retainage held on private construction projects be placed in an interest-bearing account. Presently, there is no requirement for the payment of interest on monies held under retainage, which really means that the subcontractor or contractor is floating the owner an interest-free loan. Why should this be? If we aren't going to eliminate the requirement for retainage entirely, shouldn't at a minimum a contractor or subcontractor be paid interest on money that is being held indefinitely by the project owner? Second, S2924, also introduced by Senator DeFrancisco, requires that any retainage held by a public owner or contractor representing retainage for a subcontractor's work must be released no later than 60 days from the completion and acceptance by the public owner of the subcontractor's work. Under current practice, a subcontractor must wait until the entire project is complete before receiving their retainage, which can be anywhere from 5 to 10% of the overall cost of the job, a very substantial amount. Again, this often amounts to an interest-free loan from a subcontractor to a contractor, and the process should be either eliminated or reformed. S6315, also introduced by Senator DeFrancisco, will help clarify the definition of substantial completion. This bill is presently on the Senate floor, and we urge its passage. Finally, I'd like to mention NECA's strong support for S6906, which was introduced by Senator Ranzenhofer. This new bill would prohibit the inclusion of time-sensitive notice provisions in public work contracts that can result in complete forfeiture of a contractor or subcontractor's valuable rights to a claim under a public construction contract. A growing problem for both contractors and subcontractors, these erroneous and justifiable gotcha notice provisions are delivering ill-gotten windfalls to public agencies and taking a terrible toll on unsuspecting, hardworking contractors and subcontractors. S6906 simply provides that unless a public agency can show prejudice or material harm as a result of a contractor or subcontractor failing strictly to comply with a notice provision in a public works contract, the public agency cannot declare a complete forfeiture of the contractor or subcontractor's claim. In essence, all we are asking is that we have our day in court or arbitration to prove a claim instead of it being yanked away from us, even when the public owner can show no material harm as a result of the late notice. The Senate Corporations Committee passed this bill on May 9, and it is now on the Senate floor calendar. Again, we urge the passage of this bill. On behalf of the New York Electrical Contractors Association, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today to talk about these important issues. Our ability as contractors to grow our business in New York is directly linked to our ability to receive prompt payment for completed work. Thank you for listening, and more importantly, thank you for acting. Thank you for introducing a package of beneficial legislation in the New York State Senate that could help make the business climate for contractors and subcontractors more favorable. Working together, hopefully we can pass a few of these important bills before the end of this legislative season. Thank you.
Hopefully we can pass them all, Mr. Rosigno. Senator Sabino.
Thank you, Senator Martins. Thank you, Peter. In the page 3 of your testimony, you reference a particular case where the New York City Controller's Office was holding payment on one of the contractors, and it says the change order altered the project, ended up costing more, but it was approved, the work was completed to the owner's satisfaction, but now the subcontractor is suing in court because the controller won't pay. Why? Like, what leads to that scenario? How does that happen? So here you have change order, but it's approved. Work is satisfactory. Everybody's happy. Why is the controller holding the money?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question, and I think
You may not have to know that particular, like,
Yeah.
what leads to a scenario? Like, why is it, there seems to be a continuing theme in here that
Yeah.
it's the public agencies that are the bigger problem, and quite frankly, I take far more calls from subcontractors about public agencies, particularly the MTA and the School Construction Authority, than I ever do from private contractors. So I'm just curious as to what is it that seems to get in the way with the public agencies?
You know, I don't know. I would have to ask our subcontractor on that issue. I know on the private side, a lot of times it's alterations by the owner who's on the job site constantly, who wants to see maybe an additional hi-hat installed or one eliminated. But on the public side, you know, I can't answer that, and I wish that I could for you.
Because that is a bit of a concern. Because one would think if everybody was happy.
It would lead right to the payment.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to guess. I don't know. I'll spitball this one. I'm going to guess that perhaps the owner, public authority, decided that it was not necessary and it was the general contractor's responsibility, or it was part of the general contractor's contract portion that they had purchased. And so when the subcontractor submitted the change order to the general contractor, who in turn submitted it to the owner said no, and the general contractor disagreed. And so the general contractor turned to the subcontractor and said, no, that's part of your scope because the owner won't pay me, so I'm not going to pay you. And so since it's the subcontractor that initially put out all of the money for the project, for that particular change order, material and labor, I would guess that if the owner's not willing to pay the general contractor and the general contractor is not willing to pay the subcontractor, then the subcontractor, being the aggrieved party, which is the person who's carrying all of the expense on that, they don't care whether the owner is responsible for it or the GC is responsible for it. They want somebody to pay them. Now, since they can't sue the owner directly because they don't have privity with the owner, they have to actually go after the general contractor in order to force the issue, who in turn will probably have to bring an action against the owner. But that's usually how these things, in my mind, would probably break out. The owner says no, the GC had told the person to do the work, the subcontractor did the work at the GC's direction. The owner then says they're not paying for it, and the sub has to say, well, I have no option. Since I can't get to the owner, I've got to get through the GC first.
And the poor sub is on the hook.
Always.
Always. Because the sub doesn't have the ability to say, I'm not going to perform the work until somebody signs off on this change order, do they?
Sure. Oh, they can.
They can. But if they were to do that on a regular basis, how long would that extend a job on average? Yeah,
And how long would it-
exactly.
How long-
Exactly.
And the question is, how long would they actually be on the job and without being thrown off and another subcontractor hired to become
Who
the
also
same
wouldn't get
trade?
paid, though. So you have this never-ending series of subcontractors getting short shrift.
I thank you for being here. I thank you for the analysis. I appreciate it. In the context of what would be helpful to the subcontractors in your association, do you see the ability to arbitrate as being a positive thing, to require that in the event that there is that dispute earlier on, that there are finite time frames, the request for payment is submitted, the answer is provided within a certain period of time, 30 days, 45 days. And then if there's a disagreement, that the subcontractor be given the opportunity, while continuing to do the work, to seek a third person or third party, either through arbitration or otherwise, to be able to intercede and make a decision on that issue. Do you see that as being helpful to the contractors that are part of your association?
Yes, definitely. I think the last thing a subcontractor wants to do is to litigate. You know, the pool for subcontractors and the pool for general contractors are only so big. So if you continue to have to litigate around these issues, you know, it causes discomfort amongst the industry and what potential job you might go after that. You know, we are in arbitration a lot between our, you know, affiliates in the union and our project labor agreements and stuff like that. And it's a process that's proven to work. We just agreed to a 3-year labor project agreement, collective bargaining agreement with our union. And that, you know, being able to talk and to negotiate through a third party is important. And yes, our subcontractors do see that as helpful over the courtroom.
Yeah, I didn't mention earlier the concern that there seems to be about an attack on arbitration that we're reading about in like publications like the New York Times. It's not necessarily in areas like this. There seems to be in some sectors of the marketplace, there seems to be this indication that young people are being encouraged to give up their rights to litigate in the workplace in an effort to force them into arbitrations when it's probably not in their best interest. I don't think that's the case here. I think arbitration has served this industry well. It's certainly served the labor movement well. And I don't believe there's any reason why we would ever go in a different direction.
And I think it's important to notice too that the general contractors can't do it without the subs, and
Right.
the subs can't do it without the general contractor. So to sort of bridge that relationship through an arbitration type of situation is more beneficial to both parties than it is to go litigate in court.
And I would just add that, I would expect that whatever is done in this context would also afford the general contractor the same ability as against the owner, whether it's a public owner or a private owner, because if there is a dispute and if payment is an issue in that dispute, the sooner it's resolved, clarified, the sooner people can move forward. So thank you. Thanks very much for
very
coming.
much.
Next up, we have Hank Kita. Hank is the Executive Director of the Subcontractors Trade Association. Welcome.
He has stories. Stories,
Yes, some stories.
Stories are good.
yes.